clinging to life when you're going to die. And the powers and principalities you call into yourself because your soul and your spirit and your body is dying and you're fighting to live. You're fighting for breath. You're fighting for life. And you'll take anything that's offered to you, anything at all, and all of the principalities that come into your being. You call them. You will them. Save me.
Yeah. And see, Barbara, that's the plan. I mean, that's a whole setup. That's a scenario that's structured because that's exactly what they wanted you to do. Yeah. Well, I know this is not easy, Barbara, and I do appreciate it. We're not done. We're just going to trust the Lord as to whatever's important for history and any other survivors out there that may have been maybe afraid to talk about this, that are in this age group, that Uncle Pepe or whatever name he went by, and for you as Uncle. I know just even recently here with Connie, I think it was today, just there's a tremendous history where he was brought into your life, Connie, and when you're, of course, your biological parents are European. King George is your father, like with Dan, like with Barbara, you share the same father, they different mother. But you were brought to this country and placed in a surrogate family, etc. But how, in remembering Dr. Mengele, what stands out to you, having already heard some of these people share, Connie, what would you like to bring in at this point in terms of the history that you've had with Dr. Mengele?
Well, first of all, it was interesting to hear Barbara talking about him as being uncle, because that's the way I knew him, too. I had actually written that down today. And also when she shared about how he would sing hymns, that was also another thing I wrote down. Because
let me just stop right here. Have you and Barbara, have you ever talked about this or collaborated on this?
Oh, no, I didn't know anything she shared tonight. I hadn't heard that part of any of her history.
Yeah. I knew that, but I just wanted the listeners to hear that. Go ahead.
As far as Mengele, I don't remember a time in my life when he wasn't a pretty intricate part of my life up till 79. Some of my earliest memories, well, like with Julie, as I get more of myself back, I can see that my whole conception, birth, was very, very planned, and he was an integral part of that. But on a real practical level, hey, I'm going to do this. Some of my earliest memories are when he would use extreme heat and extreme cold, bright lights, and then utter darkness, like just real using electroshock as he takes you in and out of these various states. Freezing a person was a big thing he liked to do, then take you into extreme heat afterwards. One of the first...
Now, when you're describing these extremes and this trauma, this is causing dissociation and splitting, and of course, spirits are being channeled into your during these traumatic events.
Yes, at a core level, it was creating this extreme dichotomy, so that there would always be this internal conflict within me. So, like, the way he would do that at a very young age was using colors. He would come in, he would do a color chart, and he'd teach you what the different colors were. And you knew that you better remember them really well, or there'd be punishment. So I'd have them in my little mind. I think I had these 3 little colors all figured out. And then the next time he'd come in, he'd say, okay, point to pink, and I'd point to the pink. And he'd slap me across the face, and he'd say, that's not pink. What's wrong with you? I told you this, and he would actually be lying, because I had remembered him correctly. But through the process, never trust yourself. Never trust anything that your mind tells you. You can never trust yourself. Truth will be found in another person, those other persons being people that are programmers, handlers that are put into your life. They're the only ones you can trust. Never trust yourself. If you're inclined to think that this never happened to you, you can go talk to them, and they'll assure you it never happened to you. So, I mean, it's like in my core self, it always was very, very conflicted. Well, when I was brought to the U.S. when I was 3, I was placed in this Mennonite family, and they lived in Hartville, Ohio at the time. And he came to stay with my parents for a very extended period of time. He passed himself off as an evangelist, and he actually went to church with us. He went to the potlucks. He would go to, we'd have hymn sings on Sunday nights. He'd go to hymn sings. He loved to sing, and he could harmonize beautifully. We didn't use the piano in the church itself, but in our home we had one. My dad bought one later on in life so that he could play it. And
did your surrogate family, did they know who he was?
My dad knew who he was. My mother did not.
So he could be there because of all the dissociation and all the stuff in the family. He could pass off as somebody that they wouldn't know.
He was the man. I always called him the man of many faces. Like I saw him where he would have white hair and look very, very old when he was in his 30s. I would see him with a mustache and without. He would he would dress as an Amish man sometimes. He dressed as a Mennonite when he was with us, because the men wore certain kinds of suit coats and so forth. So I always called him the man of many colors, many coats, many hats, because he could pass himself off as he needed to. So in my earlier years, that was in Hartville. When we moved to Minnesota, he came there, and we had a third story, and I've talked about this on one of the other programs. On the third story, that was his headquarters, and there were people brought in. We were a part of a mission. My dad was actually a pastor, so he would take him around with him and just pass him off as an evangelist. When we got to Minnesota, he was in the 3rd floor, and they had we were connected with a mission that was up in Canada, and we would house these missionary pilots that would come down to the States for more of their training. And so when we would take him to church with us, when we had like all the Mennonite churches in that area would get together, my dad would just pass him off as one of the pilots. But there were times that he was there that nobody would know that he was there except my dad and I. Now, my surrogate father didn't know him in the way that I did. There were things that he knew about, but there was a lot more that I knew about than he did. So he knew a certain level. He knew that this man, that he knew I wasn't his own daughter. He knew that this man was came from Germany. He knew that this man was a programmer. My dad would organize the youth rallies and the men.
You're talking about your surrogate dad now, right?
Yes, my surrogate father. Yes, but what he didn't know was there was a lot of stuff that went on that he didn't even know about. That was to be kept strictly secret.
Yeah.
In Joseph Mengele and myself.
Yeah. Well, here's what I want to just bring up now. Okay, you're in this surrogate family. What is the connection between your father, King George VI, and Joseph Mengele? Because, I mean, the reason why Mengele is here in the United States is not because of your surrogate family and your Mennonite family. I mean, he's employed by King George VI. Is that correct, or is that done this?
Yes. King George VI died when I was 3. And before that happened, when I was about 1.5, George handed me over to what I call Mr. P. I knew him as my father, but he was Mr. P. He was, for all practical purposes, I saw him as my father because... Yeah.
Well, let me just go public. This is, Mr. P is referred to as the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. So we'll go public with this, and you know what? We've got a lot of corroborated testimonies, and if he happens to hear this, go for it. Do whatever you have to do. We're not going to back down. This is who you are, Prince Philip. You are the handler that took over after King George VI died. We know who you are, Prince Philip, and we do not fear you, nor any of you in your family, because we belong to the Most High, and you cannot touch us without going through Jesus Christ. So get the message. Go ahead.
Well, you had asked something. I don't remember what you asked.
It was just the fact that he was a worker. He was hired by King George for the 6th, and then you were handed off to Prince Philip to be your primary handler, and so Mengele would then be directly working under the aegis of Philip then.
Yes, absolutely, yes. He was paid by Philip and other world leaders at that time.
Yes.
Yes.
I know this is, and I know there are others in that family line that have been recently involved with Barbara. We know one of his sons. So, these so-called royal families are anything but royal, okay? I have a particular thing I would like to say what they are royal, but I won't do it. I'll spare the audience because my blood is already boiling when I think about it. But, go ahead. You were going to say anything else?
That's okay. Go ahead.
I was just thinking that, I'll just throw this out. I mean, if you have anything else you want to share, I know that throughout your life, we're going to talk about how he ended. There's the official story of how his life ended, and then there's the collaborative report of how, that we came across years ago about how he ended. It was actually a ritual sacrifice, which he willingly yielded himself to give his life. Yeah. But before I do that, you go right ahead, Connie, because I think you had something else. Because I mentioned, the involvement of the royal family and how, how Mengele was really, really working for them. Is that correct?
Yes. And I, as sick as it may sound, I had kind of a love-hate relationship with him because he could be very charming and pretend to be very compassionate. But he always had an ulterior motive, which I found out as I got older. But when I was younger, I was drawn into that. It's like, on one hand, he could do all these nice things for you. Then he could turn around and, like, I had to be by his side when he was taking younger children through what I called their paces.
That's technique.
Huh?
That is technique.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so as he was doing that, I would have to have the clipboard there, and he would rattle off all these little notes that I was supposed to be making for him. But what I was always struck by was how he could do it in a way that was so, like, what he was doing was so horrific, but his face would never change. He would always be very calm. He would be very, he would sing. He would sing about things like Jesus loves the little children of the world, things like that,
Unbelievable.
And so for me, I just had a terrible time with it because I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I was always trying to figure things out, and I've really internalized him. It's kind of like this, even though he's no longer alive and hasn't been for years, it's like, for all practical purposes, it's like he's inside my head and I still hear him, And I just today got to, like, the internal Mengele, and that I'm not him. I'm not him. I'm sorry. I don't think I can talk anymore.
That's okay. You've been doing really good. I know. We'll give you a break. But thank you, because I know that this, recalling, we're not just, you're not just recalling a person. We're talking about someone who is probably one of the, when he was on trial, when his name was brought up, when they captured Eichmann, and they brought up Dr. Joseph Mengele, Eichmann froze.
Yeah.
I mean, the others were afraid. When he was at Auschwitz, he led. I mean, when all the various, the other doctors were there, he was always present. He was very zealous. He was always involved, even though when he could have had some time off and the other doctors could take over some of the projects, he was there. I mean, he wanted to be in the forefront, and he was dressed in his white gloves and his black boots, and he was like really proud of what he was doing. So he really embodied the Auschwitz